in advance. I think up until tomorrow you have time. I do have another item, Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
I did have another item. I mean, there was more than one. I needed to make some sense out of these special meeting actions by the majority of council. A lot of emails had come and gone. Some of the people, I may just be the only one now, that had been bounced back on emails, hadn't any real notice until 2 days before that meeting. That meeting on the 26th. For apparently the suspension of the manager was due to a cause reported to be spending money like water. I believe Mr. Johns made that accusation. I've reviewed the budget, and I've also reviewed some things from the August 13th, 2013 regular council meeting, and I just want to go over a couple of them because it was actually a very spirited meeting. One of the residents referred to the ordinance on police hiring at that time and questioned how many police officers were needed in Monroeville, and Mrs. McKinney answered 50. And the resident inquired about the current number at that time, and Mrs. McKinney answered that there were 47. There, of course, had been attrition. There were 2 deaths. The retirement window, because I do sit on the Police Pension Committee, and when you are chosen to be a liaison to committees, and there's a question, which I was trying to reach out to one particular council member who was not able to be reached. One of the advantages I had being on the Police Pension Committee was to see what past windows were open for retirement, how many people wanted to go through them, and how, because of what is a very careful process, you don't want to have too many people retire at once. So I could have given information based on my being present at that meeting, the intention of the retirees, the people who are looking forward to the retirement, because in that department, I know that the intensity of the number of years, you're looking at that magic date, and you want to make sure that you have enough money in the pension budget so that you can take that opportunity. That would have been a very simple phone call for anybody on council who had a question as to whether or not there were real intentions of retirements, to call the person who was the liaison to the pension committee. Going on with what was said at the 13th of August meeting, the question that had to do about how many we were budgeted for and where we were at, that resident suggested that we just, get on with it. And if we had the money in the budget, please do so. Hiring should be done, and be done with it. And, of course, Mrs. McKinney stated that it was currently being done. And, of course, Mayor Aracinko at the same meeting explained that he supports the budget increase in the police department, but that there was his concern of this current shortfall that was perceived at $600,000. And we had a very long discussion about the revenue side, where the real estate taxes and the reassessments were of question. We ended up finding out at the end of that month that the question about whether or not we had a very big shortfall was actually that even though you had commercial and residential assessments and reassessments, that there were very few residential reassessments that were left to challenge how much real estate tax was going to be paid. There were more commercial reassessments, such as the mall, and I mentioned about that at that same meeting. And what we had in surplus on the other end, because we got more revenue on that end, alleviated the thought that there was any 2013 budgetary issues. So that took care of that concern. And then Mrs. McKinney was commended at that same meeting and for the job that she did on that. I also brought up to council at that meeting that because of the enormous amount of overtime that had been budgeted, and the fact that when you looked at the line items that were set aside for the detective division in particular, there was an $80,000 line item on that, just for overtime. That's how much anticipated overtime there was expected of the police force. But because of the hiring patterns that had occurred in the year 2013, with the retirements going out through that window of retirement, and with younger people who came in under a different tiered system, that there were 6 steps to those tiers, and that it would take a long time, not 18 months, but years, in order to reach the level of dollars per hour that are expected for a police officer. We effectively knocked down that expenditure. So instead of having to spend $80,000 just for overtime in the detective division, we only ended up taking out $7,000 at that time. That's how effective of a hiring pattern of the police department affects budgets. You hire people who are younger, as people retire, and you don't use your overtime regardless of the minimums, which were appropriate minimums. If you hire wisely, bring in younger police personnel, and allow people who are going through that budget to the retirement window, there's a savings, and she was commended for that, because there is not as much of a drawdown from that overtime budget. I want everybody to go back and revisit the meeting, the minutes of that meeting, because that explains pretty well where we're at. Now, going back to what I had to say about this, I'd like to know, because I'm pretty sure everybody's here who was here at that special meeting. Apparently, there was just cause. Who found just cause? Whose decision was that to have a with cause?
Nothing was mentioned about that at this time.
So nothing.
You well know, under the Home Rule Charter, Lois, you know it as well as anybody sitting up here, and probably a lot of these folks out here, she has a right to a hearing within 30 days, but actually it's going to be January 6th. Am I not correct?
Council did not remove the manager.
That's correct.
Council suspended the manager with pay.
Well, I was going to get to that.
The manager of this municipality is still Lynette, to the extent that she has not been removed. 704 has not been employed under the Home Rule Charter at this point.
Okay. Who called for the subsequent executive session to the special meeting? Because as I read the advertisement, and you should know how I felt about it, because I sent an email to both you and the mayor, Mr. Dice, that not only did I think it was unusual when you could have picked the phone up and said, you know what, I'd like to advertise for a special meeting, please advertise, that our solicitor would be the one that advertised for this special meeting. At the same time, though, you didn't advertise for any executive session. So we've had an executive session held, as we now find out at the beginning of this meeting, that was not advertised, but could be advertised. And then we had what appears to be a decision that was made, which was a vote during that executive session. So who called for the executive session? Well, according to Mayor Aracinko, it was the majority of council. Who made some decisions that were inside that meeting? What have we learned about those decisions?
First off, you know we cannot talk about executive session issues, and it's happened more than once. You can have a meeting, I don't care if it's a regular meeting, a special meeting, executive sessions can come up at last minute. We followed the law. We announced, or I announced it out rather, that we had the executive session on the 26th for personnel reasons. That meets the standard. Am I not correct, Mr. Dice?
Yes.
The Pennsylvania Sunshine Act requires advertising and public notice. There was opportunity before you gaveled down. There was no public notice. There was no mention to break away, which we often do if we have a need to break away.
Mr.
That we
Dice,
go
would you
into
please?
executive session.
Well, certainly we can talk about this for a long time, but let me read the statute. The reason for holding the executive session must be announced at an open meeting occurring immediately prior to or subsequent to the executive session. So you can go into executive session following a meeting and announce the reason for the executive session at the next meeting following the executive session and announce the reason. And in this case, it was announced tonight that it was for personnel reasons.
Yep, I heard you.
And we've done that before. And that's section, just so everybody understands, that's section 708B of the Sunshine Law.
Yeah, I have it in front of me.
All right.
I do. What have we learned during this? And again, this is my comment, so, you're answering that question. The unhiring of new police officers who were hired in the line, actually in line with the 2013 budget, that decision was made by who? Was that the majority of council, as you said, Mr. Mayor?
I never said that.
You never said that. All right. Voting to lock out the finance director, the HR and finance director's email while she took vacation, was that a majority of council vote as well?
Not to my knowledge.
Well, I do require answers. I'd
If
like
you'd like to go to an executive session, we can do that. I'm not going to address personnel
Yeah, I think
issues out here. That is totally up to you.
I think we should. I think that I'd like to call for one. I call for an executive session.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye?
Let's go.
Roll call.
Let's do roll call. Sharon, please.
Mr. Erb?
Aye.
Dr. Griesach?
Aye.
Mrs. Drumheller?
Aye?
Ms. Johns?
No.
Mrs. Allison?
Aye.
Mr. Duncan?
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break for an executive session, and we should not be that long.
Just so I understand, the reason for this executive session is to discuss what happened at the executive session that we had.
Which is
That is
personnel?
correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Just on the executive session that we had.
All right, that's fine.
And we're back in session, and Council, I'd like to entertain a motion to come out of an executive session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll continue with our meeting.
Mr. Mayor, may I just finish one more comment on my report of the officials? Post our executive session, which did not shed too much light on some answers, and too bad for me, because that's just something that is going to be, we're just going to have somebody else deal with a whole lot of issues here. I do want to say this, though. I'm thinking of a lot of people who are kind-spirited and mean-spirited. Nelson Mandela died today. There's a kind spirit for you. I think of Mahatma Gandhi, too. It's always been a mystery to me how men can feel themselves honored by the humiliation of their fellow human beings. And that's what he said. I feel that regardless of the types of decisions that were carried on at that special meeting, that motion, there were three, but the motion, the first one, that was delivered in a mean spirit, the way it was intended, it just demonstrates the most concentrated work Mr. Johns has accomplished to this date. And I'm through with my report.
And ladies and gentlemen, I do not want to belabor, I just want to tell everybody I'll have more on my report on Tuesday. I'll hold all my comments, and with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, and good night, ladies and gentlemen.